Welcome, everyone. It's Tuesday afternoon, and this is the hockeydebates.com podcast. And today we're joined by a special guest, a three-time Olympian, a two-time gold medal winner, Sami Jo Small. And we're going to talk about Olympics. We're going to talk about women's hockey, and we're going to learn a whole lot today. So stay tuned. We'll be right back. Welcome again. And I'm Bob Duff, and that's my co-host, Kevin Allen. And today, as we said, our guest is Sami Jo Small, a three-time Canadian Olympian. And Sami, the question we always start with when someone writes a book, obviously that's why you're here to talk about your book. And why don't we show your book right now while we're talking about it? There it is, Sami Jo Small, The Role I Played. And let's talk about the role you played and also why you wanted to write a book.
Well, those are two really big questions. I think that let's start with first why I wanted to write the book. It's been something that I have wanted to do for a long time now. And I started journaling when I was with the national team, keeping logbooks of my training regimens, of games, using it as a tool at the time. But when I retired from the national team, or essentially was cut from the national team, I had all this documentation, I had all this information, and I was starting to work as a full-time speaker. So I'm a professional speaker doing corporate and association events, and a lot of speakers have books. And I thought, I'll just quickly write a book, put it at the back of the room and sell a couple after events and make a little bit more money. But once I started to get really into it and I started to really write the book, I realized that the stories that I was writing about were bigger than me. It wasn't just about me. It was about this amazing time in women's hockey that was transformative and really included a lot of really incredible women. And I wanted their stories to be told as well. I wanted our story as a team to be told. And so it took me some time. To do the research and to ensure that I got the timelines right and I got the characters right. I had a daughter along the way, so parenthood came on, and that's just a whole nother gambit. So once she went to kindergarten, that was really when I pulled it off the shelf and decided that I was going to go to a publisher, and ended up with East Press. And it's been basically about a year since I've been with them and sort of been in their trajectory. And then the pandemic hit, and that was the time for me to publish the book.
Sami, when we think about women's hockey now, it seems like it's pretty mature, especially for people who have been around a while. They know that it started. I remember covering the Women's World Championships in Kitchener in the early 1990s. But really, it's still in its infancy. And when I look at it, I think about how far women's hockey has come. Like, I remember what it was like in the early 1990s, and now I look at it now and just the level of sophistication and the competitiveness of it and the talent level. And can you kind of speak to that as someone who was, involved in the first Olympic participation and have seen it grow to where it is today?
For sure, you're right. I think that we are at a pivotal time in women's hockey because it really can go in so many different directions. I think to say it's in its infancy, we've gone through a lot of different cycles of infancy. And I grew up at a time in Winnipeg when it was unacceptable for girls to play hockey. There was no girls hockey teams, and what I was doing was different. But I found out later, after going through the historical data, writing this book, that there was periods in time in the last century where women did play a lot of hockey. And I think that is a testament to the society and where it was at various different times, treating women in, different ways through the last century and the opportunities that we had as women. And so what I am incredibly proud of now is in Canadian society that, we're starting to see a difference in opportunities that there once were now available for women in all different aspects. So, I think that young girls can now aspire to do and be anything. Now it just comes down to what we get paid to do those endeavors. But I love that I can walk into a rink now and see little girls with a hockey bag over their shoulder and it just be normalized. And I guess I really felt that at the very first Olympics. I was very lucky to be a part of. And we had a lot of various different people on that team. We had women that had fought for this right to play this game. We had people that had been around for a long time when it wasn't accepted, and it wasn't in the newspapers. It wasn't written about. The people like Francais Louis, like Stacey Wilson, that were true pioneers in the game. And then there's my generation that came behind them that really reaped the rewards of everything that they did. But there was a whole generation before them that never got to play, that, maybe got to play when they were little or played with their brothers a little bit on the rinks in their backyard. But it just is amazing how far it really has come. And I am, while a lot of people will say right now in women's hockey, there's, the question of pay and having a professional league for women. I just love that we're able to even have those conversations, because that would not have been the case even a decade ago, that we would be in a place where we could fight for these rights. It's not simply about playing hockey anymore. It's not about showing people that we have a good product, because people know that. It's now sort of that next steps, and what kind of opportunities do we have for these young girls post-college, because now there's so many opportunities at the collegiate level, at the provincial level, at the national level, and the international level. So it certainly has come a long, long way. And I think the 10 years that I write about in this book is really sort of that pivotal moment where it went from obscurity to part of the national fabric.
I remember when I was in college, I coached in the MTHL with the Toronto East Enders, and at that time, wasn't my age group that she was trying to play in, but that was when Justine Blaney was going to court for the right to be able to play in the MTHL. And, even though I wasn't my team, it still gave me a lot of pride that it was our organization that fought to get her that right. And she ended up playing for our organization.
Yeah, that's an amazing story of Justine Blaney and her fight, and how it not only took over boys hockey at the time, but also women's hockey. I think within women's hockey had to think about what is the place in the game. And I was really lucky to get to play with Justine Blaney when I joined my first professional team, the Brampton Thunder. And I wouldn't have been able to play growing up had she not won that court case. So, it's amazing how it kind of came full circle. But she suffered a lot because of it. I think she didn't get to play in the MTHL for at least a year, maybe 2 years, while the court case was going on. So who knows what kind of player she could have ended up becoming. She was still such a great player, but she never did make it to the national level. And maybe it's because she, had to go through this to allow the rest of us to be able to come through that behind her as she sort of changed the course of women's hockey.
And then my time working in Windsor, obviously got to know Megan Agosta quite well. And there was a couple of coaches who she was playing in the boys high school league in Windsor after she'd come back from the 2006 Olympics. And there were a couple of coaches who tried to get her banned from the league. And I said, Megan, look how far you've brought women's rights. It used to be they didn't want you to play because you're a girl. They don't want you to play because you're too good.
Yeah. It's very true. It was amazing to see in 2006, Megan when she was trying out for the team, she was 17 or 18 years of age at the time. And we played in the boys AAA midget loop in Alberta. And so she's playing against peers her own age. And she's just as good, if not better, than these boys. And a lot of the boys went on to play in the NHL. It was really amazing to see just how far it had come, because, we were a decade older than her at the time. But for her to be on par at that age was pretty incredible.
Now, I'm interested in your sports background in general. You've played pretty much everything. You were a volleyball player, you were a badminton player, and you actually went to Stanford on a track and field scholarship and played goal for the men's hockey team.
I did. I grew up at a time when, like I said, women's hockey was really not acceptable. So there wasn't really as many opportunities. There was no national team. There's no Olympics for us to aspire to. So I think part of the reason I got to play all these other sports was I wasn't pigeonholed into one sport early. There wasn't a ton of pressure on young girls to play or perform. So I got to play all these different sports. And, before I became a parent here in the GTA, I used to encourage other people to, make sure that your kids play a bunch of different sports and don't let them pick one too early. But now I realize that in the GTA, that's really hard. It's really hard when somebody gets home from work at 5 o'clock, drives for an hour to get to a game, plays the game, and then might have multiple children trying to do that with, and then getting them involved in different sports. So I think now what I encourage is more of a balance. So to find other passions, and that doesn't have to necessarily be other sports, although I do think other sports are really good at just for your overall mental health and mental well-being and your physical well-being. But it could be something as simple as ensuring that you walk your dogs every day, or learning how to play the piano, or something you could do maybe in your time when you're in the car on the way to a certain sport, to just really ensure that you have balance in your life. And I think that goes to kids and adults as well. So that, I know for me, when I became a full-time hockey player, the hardest thing was to not dwell on the last night's practice or the last night's game. Played so much on my psyche, because I been used to playing all these different sports, going from one to the next. And I think that that's what allowed me to become a better hockey player, was I played all these different roles. In some sports I was horrible and I was the worst, and in others I was really good and excelled. So it made me realize sort of all the different types of individuals it takes to have on a team. And it made me have to always fight to be better and always push myself to be better. And if I had a bad game in one sport, 5 minutes later, I'm in a car on the way to the next one. So you couldn't linger too long on one.
What's interesting to me about women's hockey is that when it debuted at the Olympics, it instantly became one of the most important sports at the Winter Olympics. There was an energy about it in 1998 that I remember that the fan base and the television cameras immediately embraced. And that stayed constant. I've covered every Olympics since then. And it's always an important aspect of the Olympics. And even when I went to the World Championships here in Michigan a couple of years ago, there was an energy, that same international energy. The building was full. It was exciting. Everybody was there. But we haven't been able to translate that beyond the international competition. And I'd love to get your thoughts on, what's kind of held it back, or if you even see it as being held back, and what can be done to sort of bring that energy that comes from the international game and have it, in between the Olympic Olympians.
For sure. I think you're so right, Kevin, that there is an energy around the game, and anybody that's ever watched it or been to a game, I think becomes a fan for life. But sometimes the hardest thing is finding out when that next game is going to be. How do you go and see another game? How do I watch these women play? So I think we've battled with that within the game for a long time, is how do we bring the fan base that we know is there, over 10 million people watched in Canada watched the last game on TV. So we know the fan base is there. We know the product is good. And it's just sort of bringing those two together, which I think at times we struggle with. I think within the game, to me, I think the issue has been the financial backing. And that's at all levels. However, when we started the CWHL in 2007, we started with a budget for the entire league of $360,000. And we operated on that budget for that year and slowly progressed to the last year in the CWHL before its demise of $3.7 million. So with that came bigger crowds, bigger games, more marketing. I was the GM of the Toronto Furies in the very final season. And we averaged over 500 people a game, which might not seem like a lot, but it's a lot better than just the parents and the family and friends in the stands. We would play in some big venues where we had some marketing. So we would market 2 or 3 games per year and get 3,000 to 5,000 people. So we played at the ACC, we played at some big venues. So when, there is that ability to put the money behind the product, I know for myself as a GM, and even working on the league initially, I struggled with, do you try to get fans in the seats or do you try to get sponsorship dollars? Like, how do you bring in your money? Because getting fans in the seats takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of energy to sell that individual ticket for whatever, $15, $20, versus going to a sponsor and getting $10,000. So initially, the way we started the CWHL was with sponsorship money, because we wanted to provide the best playing environment for these girls. We wanted the product to be great. We wanted their ice time, the the accommodations around the actual operations of the game to be as strong as it could before we started to try to look at bums in the seats. So I think that's really the next step in women's hockey is the bums in the seats to make it look more like what we see as professional sport. And I think that's possible. So unfortunately, the business or the people that were involved in the CWHL in the end perhaps didn't run it in a way that allowed it to operate for the next season, we'll say, in a very non-political way. So to me, that is not because women's hockey failed. That to me is a business failure. And I think we have to separate those two, because that doesn't mean by any means that affects any of the younger levels or development of the game or the fact that we have this amazing product. There still exists the NWHL. I think that they're doing a great job in their markets of really pushing the game and showing that people want to see this game. And so now, to me, what the next steps is these, two factions, two sides now that I think really just need to come to the table and figure something out with either the NHL or the next steps. So now for me as a fan, I'm like you guys. I want to support the game. I want to cheer for these girls, and I want somewhere that I can go and do that. I don't care how that happens. I don't care what the ultimate league is that it happens in. I just want to be able. I love watching the game, so I just want to be able to see it. So that's a lot easier said than done in today's environment, because there are, there's sides. There's so many people involved in the game, but there's also so many great people involved in the game that I am excited for where it can go. And I think the next step, whatever the next thing that comes, is going to be really exciting. I just hope that it comes sooner rather than later. And with the pandemic, that sort of set back those conversations, I think, a little bit further. But that's not to say that what is here is not a good product. So the NWHL with its 5 6 teams is operating. And hopefully they can start playing soon so that we can actually watch some games. And the girls that are in the PWHPA hopefully can set up some showcases to showcase the game to more and bigger audiences. And eventually, at the top of that pinnacle, those two come together and everybody just gets along. Wouldn't that be great?
That'd be super.
One last thing I wanted to touch on before we let you go, Sammy. One of the messages I thought that was really compelling in your book, and it doesn't matter if you're male or female, and it probably doesn't even matter if it's in sports, but the aspect of being a good teammate. You talked about that a lot. You had some hardship personally you had to deal with. You were the backup goalie in the 2002 Olympics, and you were the third goalie in your other 2 Olympics, so you didn't actually get into any games. But personally, that you talk about how much that hurt, but from a collective, you knew how important it was. You had to be supportive for your team, and I think that's something that being a good teammate sounds like something that's easy to do, but nobody wants to be the backup goalie or the second string quarterback, but somebody has to fill that role, and they have to be prepared if they're called upon. So it's something I thought that really is a lesson that everyone could learn.
You're so right. I think nobody wants to be in that position. Somebody always has to be, and you never think it's going to be you, and you never think your team can possibly go on without you, but they do. So how do you come to terms with being in that supportive role? And, I think having played all these other sports, Bob, you mentioned before, the sports background made me realize that there were so many other people that had gone through this in all of the teams that I had ever played on. And so I tried to use their strength to be able to then support my teammates in that moment. I think that, having worked as a professional speaker for a long time, while writing this book, the stories that resonated the most with audience members were the ones about that particular issue was, how do you support others when you want to be where they are? How do you sort of juxtapose the jealousy and envy with support? And that's not easy. And, there isn't a magic brushstroke that you can just suddenly have this amazing lesson that you learn. There is a grieving process. There's a grieving process to realizing that you will not be in that position, whether it's a big presentation at work, whether it's in maybe a family environment, and your kids choose to want to play with the husband rather than the wife. Whatever it is, there's moments in all of our lives where we don't want it to be that way, but it is. So what can we do to make the environment better? How can we still feel of value? And part of that is that, my teammates certainly helped with that, and they made me feel valued. So that made me want to support them. And I think that when we create team, that's really important, that everybody feels of value, so that when people are put in these roles, that we can, lean on each other in these situations. But I also tried to really live vicariously through them and realize that my emotions at that moment were, I needed to put them on the back burner, because it could have gone two ways. I could have brought the team down with my negativity, or I could have supported them as they went to the gold medal game or a big presentation or whatever it is. So you kind of have two choices, and it's not easy. I mean, the days where I was a backup goalie, I often have to take time to myself, because you still want to play in that big game. However, I tried to, tell the same jokes I always tell. I tried to fill the girls' water bottles. I tried to find a place and on the bench cheered as loud as I possibly could, and just tried to be there for them so that they felt the support in that moment. And I didn't sort of derail the team. But, I think we all go through those moments, and I think we are all stronger than we think we are until we get into those moments. And that it's by no means is it something that I just magically was able to do. I think everybody does it on a daily basis, and we don't give ourselves enough credit, and we don't take pride in those moments. So that's what this book really allowed me to realize, was that, I did have a role. And while it wasn't the role I wanted to play, it certainly was a role that was important, and that we all have important roles to play in our lives.
Well, we want to thank you for joining us, Sami Jo. It's been a pleasure to have you on. You're our first, I believe, she's our first Olympic gold medalist we've had on, Kevin.
Yes, yeah.
Well, I really appreciate it.
And I got to tell you, I picked up your book on the weekend, and I started reading it, and I got so engrossed in it, I forgot I had an appointment and missed my appointment. So that's a good sign for your book.
That's a good story. I love it.
Literally, I couldn't put it down. It's true. And let's show the book one more time so everyone can see it. And Sami Jo, I assume we can get the book at all the usual places, Amazon, all the bookstores, online.
Wherever you get your regular books, you can get it. It's pretty neat for me to be able to walk into a bookstore and it be there. It's surreal at times.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks again for joining us, and all the best.
Thank you, Bob. I appreciate it.
Okay. You have yourself a great day and sell 1 million books. Thanks for your time.
All right. Take care.
Okay. Bye-bye. I thought that when I read the book, that was, to me, the most compelling part. The talk about being a good teammate. And you think about the 2002 Olympics, where she ended up being the backup goalie to Kim St. Pierre as they won the gold medal. And you think about Curtis Joseph at the 2002 Olympics, when he played the first game for Canada. They got beat by Sweden. And his coach in Toronto, Pat Quinn, was his coach in the Olympics. And Pat Quinn rode Marty Brodeur the rest of the way. And that seemed to fracture the relationship forever between Joseph and Quinn.
For sure.
That's the sign of not being a good teammate, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, that's really a fascinating story, as she was telling all that, and you guys were talking about it. I'm, as most of our viewers know, you and I have probably between the two of us written over 40 books, and I was thinking maybe we should collaborate on a book called Second String. We talk about some of the great second stringers who've had top performances, coming off the bench, but what they went through for all those years. I'm trying to think of the quarterback that made a living, a really good living. As I recall, he made $9 or $10 million in his career, but only threw about 100 passes in his NFL career. You know what I'm talking about?
That wasn't Don Strock, was it?
That wasn't Strock. It was somebody recently. He just recently retired, I think.
Oh, was that Josh McCown?
No, he played a lot more tthis guy hadn't played very much. But anyway, I mean, it does take a certain amount of the right personality and the right attitude to be a backup, knowing that, not only do you have to serve a role when you're not playing, like cheerleading, as she talked about, and just keeping everyone up. a lot of guys, and in this case, women, find that trying to be the court jester helps too. Kudobin talked about that a little bit, about how he likes to keep everyone loose when he's just the backup goalie. But then every once in a while, they tap you on the shoulder and say, "Hey, you got to go in there and win it for us." And whatever you're, whether you're a pinch hitter in baseball, or a utility player, or in football player, the backup quarterback, or Sami Jo, the backup goalie. There's always a position in sports where the backup never plays.
Yeah, I mean, you think of somebody like Earl Morrall, who was a backup for most of his career, but comes in for an injured Johnny Unitas and leads the Colts to the Super Bowl, and then
sure.
more famously comes in for the injured Bob Greasy during Miami's perfect season and kept them going until Greasy was healthy, and basically right it to the playoffs. So there's a perfect example of being a good teammate and being ready when they need you.
Well, you hear that in hockey quite a lot, about how many times have you and I heard, he's a good backup goalie. Like, he can carry a team for a short period of time, but then, he can't carry the load for 55 or 60 games. And, we've seen players like that.
I remember a long discussion with Glenn Healy about that role. As he was, he had his time with the Islanders, certainly that great Stanley Cup run they had in '93, but for most of his career, he was a backup goalie.
Right.
We had a long discussion about how you fill that role, and it is a very thankless job, because you usually get, mostly you get road games, and you're going to get the second game in back-to-backs usually, and you're going to get put in scenarios where, logically the team's probably not going to have success. So you're going to be, literally asked to take one for the team. And, and in practice, the backup goalie doesn't get to leave the ice till all the players are done. If somebody wants to stay out there and work on something with their game, you stay out there too. And then it could be 2 hours, you're out there, that's your part of your role. I mean, that's, again, being a good teammate and doing what you're needed to do. You're helping your other teammates hone their skills at your own expense, where, you're not going to play, but you're helping to hopefully make them better so you win the next game.
Yeah, and it's one of the least talked about but an important aspect of being a good backup goalie is to be a shoulder for the number one goalie to lean on. To be the confidant, to be a guy that can pat you on the back when things aren't going well, or be able to say to you, I noticed that you're not closing your pads. The guy to be really, really helpful. There's nothing worse on a team when the backup goalie thinks he should be the number one goalie, and then they're not speaking, or they don't have a good relationship. I mean, oftentimes that's the key to being a good backup goalie, is to have a good relationship with the number one goalie, because the coaches want to see that. They don't want any animosity between the top two goalies on the team.
And you think back to the in the mid '60s when they first started dressing the two goalie system, and into the '70s, and really up until the '80s, there was no goalie coach, there was no video really at all. So you really had to rely on that other goalie. If you were struggling, he was the only one that really A, understood what you were going through, and B, could analyze it and tell you what maybe you're not doing right.
No, that's for sure. And just think how far goalies have come, where it was a reflex position for so many years, and then like everything else, we brought in analysis and we brought in video, and now there's not much reflex goaltending allowed. It's all calculated. What you should do in this situation, and so forth. I mean, instincts still play a role in the wild, when you're just trying to react. But one of the things that people always talked about Dominic Hasek is that he always looked like he played out of control, but he, all of his acrobatics were all calculated on his part. Like, if you talk to him, he would tell you that, he would throw his arm way up, sometimes behind him. Well, the reason he's done that is that he had learned through the years that if he does that, that one time out of 10, he'll catch the puck of doing that. So, he started doing that, and, he calculates his odds of what he could do in that case that gives him the best opportunity, even if it's a small opportunity, but the best opportunity to do the puck. Dominic Hasek did nothing that wasn't calculated, that he hadn't thought about. That, there was a reason why he did those things. He just didn't just do it willy-nilly. He had an idea of what he was doing when he would throw his arm out or do some of the, or dive back across the net. Some of the things he would do that looked instinctual were far from it.
Yeah, and you think about the famous Mike Bossy line that he said he doesn't see goalie, he sees net. Well, 98% of NHLers and all hockey players, they see goalie, they don't see net. So my fear as a goalie myself was put something out there, and most guys are going to hit it.
Yeah. Well, it's funny you bring that up. Mario Lemieux told me one time when he was talking about the difference when the game changed for him is that he said, when you're a sniper, when you're an elite goal scorer, just as you said, the puck comes to you. The game's so fast. Like it's much faster now than it was when Mario was playing. But back then, to those guys, it was incredibly fast. And you're making split-second decisions. And he said, the puck would come to you, and you'd be in a shooting area. And he said you'd look up, and you'd see a little corner of the net, and you'd fire. That's all you need. You need just a little. You need a little sliver. Like a mail slot, in a door. And he said I'd see that slot and I'd fire. And he goes, and then all of a sudden, after they started adding layers of clothing, and goalies who were wearing a 48 jersey started to wear 58, and all extra pads, and they looked like the Michelin man and everything else. He said, well, all of a sudden I'd get that quick look, and I'd look up. I didn't see my mail slot. I didn't see that area. All I saw was, the goalie. And he said, we need to get that back. Like, he thought that the goalie's equipment needed to shrink. So he said, we don't need to see much, but we need to see a little. We need to see a little of the net. Give us something to shoot at, because we'll be able to hit it. And I think they have done that, obviously, and they've streamlined the equipment a little bit. The goalies still don't look like they did when Ken Dryden played for the Canadians in the 70s, but they don't look quite as puffy as they did during the heyday of the extra padding era of the NHL.
I remember Mickey Redmond telling me he gave Gordie Howe a lot of the credit for his 50-goal seasons in Detroit, because he said when he got to the Red Wings, Gordie took him out on the ice in practice one day and repositioned his head, basically, so where his view of the net was changed. And he said he was amazed that just the adjustment of a few inches of where his head was when he was carrying the puck, he could see so much more net than he could in his previous, just counting on the goalie. And he said it was just a subtle little thing, but he said it made a world of difference. And he said that's how brilliant Gordie Howe was. He could see that and show him how to do it. And he went from being a guy who was scoring 20 goals a year to a guy who was scoring 50 goals a year.
Yeah, well, Gordie Howe was just, incredible. There's just so many great stories about. I was just retelling someone about that. Gordie would play 40 plus minutes a game, and he wanted to rest. He'd go back and play defense. And, it was a younger person I was telling that story to, and they were just flabbergasted by that. That you'd go back and play some defense so you could rest, and then go back on the forward line. And the great Bill Gadsby. Now if a player plays 27 minutes or something in a game, it's phenomenal. And Bill Gadsby once told me if I didn't play 40 minutes a game, because they only use 4 defensemen, really. He said if I didn't play 40 minutes, I didn't think I was doing my job. So it's a different time now.
Yeah, and speaking of time, we're out of time. As usual, we've run over our time, but we'll be back with you on Thursday with another great guest and more compelling hockey talk. This has been the HockeyDebates.com podcast. I'm Bob. He's Kevin, and we'll see y'all on Thursday afternoon.